The night sky above eastern Burkina Faso shook with fire. Villagers awoke to explosions, not the terror of an ambush, but the beginning of a liberation. For years, families across the east and center-east of the country lived in constant fear. Armed groups appeared from the forests without warning, setting up roadblocks, kidnapping travelers, and raiding villages. Mothers kept their children from school. Farmers abandoned their fields. Traders refused to travel the highways. Fear was the currency of daily life. But now, something is changing. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the fight against terror has entered a new chapter. 2 operations, Kalari and Ilgendé, struck with precision and speed. They dismantled camps that militants thought were invisible and proved that no forest, no riverbank, no abandoned village can hide them anymore. For the first time in years, communities feel that the state is no longer retreating inch by inch. Instead, the army is advancing, reclaiming land, and restoring dignity. Yet this story is not just about missiles and soldiers. It is about ordinary people who have carried the weight of terror on their shoulders. A 60-year-old mother whispered with tears that her daughter could finally walk to school again without looking over her shoulder. A driver confessed that he used to write a prayer on his steering wheel before every trip, afraid of being stopped by gunmen on the road. Today, he drives without fear. These are not statistics. These are lives once paralyzed, now breathing again. But while the victories bring hope, they also bring questions. Can Burkina Faso sustain this momentum? Will the armed groups strike back even harder? And how will the world, especially the United States and France, respond to a leader who refuses to bow? Stay with us, because what is unfolding is more than a military campaign. It is a battle over the soul of a nation. If you believe that every people has the right to live free from fear, to raise children without the shadow of war, then listen closely. This story is about more than Burkina Faso. It is about the meaning of freedom in our time. The first strike was called Kalari. It was not only a battle, but a lesson in patience, intelligence, and precision. For months, villagers near the border had heard footsteps in the forest, the whispers of armed men hiding under the trees, building camps in places they thought no one could reach. They believed the forest was their shield, the night their ally. But above them, the eyes of the sky were watching. Surveillance drones, reconnaissance pilots, and young officers tracked every move. They followed the drills, the late-night meetings, the supply deliveries that slipped through the shadows. Instead of rushing headlong into a trap, the army waited. They waited until the militants gathered in full, until their confidence became arrogance. And then, in the dead of night, the silence was torn apart. The first missile cut through the darkness. Fire erupted, trees shook, and smoke rose in violent spirals. Panic spread. The militants scattered, firing blindly into the sky, but their bullets never reached the invisible enemy above. Within moments, a second strike fell. What was once a stronghold was now ash and silence. Kalari sent a message across the region. There is no longer a place to hide. The age of invisible camps is over. For the people, this was not just a military victory. It was a moment of liberation. Farmers returned to their fields without glancing nervously at the tree line. Children walked to school without crouching in fear at the sound of gunfire. One elderly farmer said softly, "This land was once our graveyard. Today, it is our harvest again." Yet even as the echoes of Kalari still rolled through the eastern forests, another fire ignited in the center-east. This was Ilgendé. In Yorudkin, militants attacked a local defense position, hoping to destabilize the community and retreat into the cover of the Tiourel forest. But this time, their plan unraveled almost immediately. The rapid reaction forces moved in. The air patrols were already circling. The militants rushed into abandoned houses and collapsed mud walls, believing they could disappear into the wreckage. But the sky lit up once again. Guided bombs rained down, precise and devastating. Walls crumbled into dust, trees shattered, and what seemed like safety turned into a death trap. Survivors tried to flee toward Kabonga, clinging to the riverside woods, desperate to escape. But the eye of the sky never blinked. A missile hit the riverbank. Flames engulfed their formation, and those who scattered deeper into the forest were cut down by strikes that followed them step by step. Ilgendé declared something new to every corner of Burkina Faso. There are no more safe havens. The forests, the rivers, the abandoned hamlets, none of them can protect those who bring terror. For local families, Ilgendé was more than a battle. It was a reassurance. A woman whispered that for the first time in years, she could walk to the market without fear of being dragged away. A child laughed as trucks loaded with goods returned to a town that had long been starved by isolation. These victories were not only about territory, they carried something deeper. Trust was being restored. For years, citizens questioned whether their government could defend them. Now, they began to believe again. For the army, the message was equally clear. They were not only reclaiming land, they were reclaiming the loyalty of the people. Kalari and Ilgendé rewrote the rules. No longer would Burkina Faso fight slowly, defensively, losing ground inch by inch. Now they would strike with speed and precision, catching the enemy while in motion, leaving no time for recovery. In villages, at marketplaces, in quiet conversations, people repeated the same words: "We are taking back our country." But while hope spread across the east and center-east, another question loomed large. What would happen when the militants shifted their attention to the lifelines of the nation? The highways, the roads where even a single ambush could paralyze trade, choke entire towns, and remind the people that terror still lurked. The roads of Burkina Faso have long been symbols of fear. For years, armed groups turned highways into hunting grounds. They forced vehicles to stop, demanded money, kidnapped passengers, and left entire towns cut off from the rest of the country. Traders abandoned their routes. Families hesitated to visit relatives. Each journey carried the weight of dread. In Boulé Dumuhune, that fear reached its peak. Militants built roadblocks beneath a massive tree, waiting in the heat of the day. They believed the road was theirs, and that every passing car was prey. But what they did not see was that the hunters had become the hunted. Above them, invisible eyes were watching. As one militant stepped out, raising his weapon to stop an approaching vehicle, the strike came. A precision-guided missile exploded through the tree, tearing apart the ambush before it even began. The drivers and passengers who had slowed in terror pressed their feet on the gas, surging forward with relief. For once, justice came faster than violence. And on that day, the road did not belong to the militants. It belonged again to the people. Later that morning, aerial patrols spotted another group nearby. They had gathered fuel and explosives, preparing for something bigger, perhaps an attack on a village or an ambush against the army. But their planning ended before it began. A sudden strike obliterated the stockpile, sending fire and smoke high into the sky. The ground shook, the forest burned, and when the flames settled, nothing remained but charred earth. These were not only tactical victories, they were moments that changed the psychology of war. For the first time, militants themselves were looking over their shoulders, knowing that the skies were never blind. One driver said, "For years I drove with fear in my chest. Today, for the first time, I drove with hope." A mother, watching her son return safely from a trip, wept, "The road that once stole children now gives them back." But while the villages celebrated, reactions outside Burkina Faso were more complex. In Paris, silence lingered, but French newspapers carried warnings. Analysts wrote that Burkina Faso's defiance under Traoré might inspire Mali and Niger to push further away from Western influence. In Washington, quiet concern grew. A senior official, speaking anonymously, admitted, "Traoré's new strategy and his openness to Russian support are forcing us to reconsider how we engage in the Sahel." The balance of power could shift dramatically. In Moscow, however, there was no hesitation. Russian advisors and technology, including electronic warfare systems, were quietly deployed, strengthening the very drones that guided the strikes. China, too, showed interest, offering surveillance equipment in exchange for closer ties. These reactions revealed something deeper. Kalari, Ilgendé, and the battles on the highways were not isolated fights. They were signals of a new order emerging in West Africa. And as ordinary families in Burkina Faso began to breathe again, the world's capitals watched closely, some with hope, others with unease. Inside Burkina Faso, the victories sparked waves of pride. State television hailed the operations as proof that the army, once doubted, could defend its people. Citizens in Ouagadougou marched in small rallies, praising Traoré as a leader who refused to surrender. But in the back of everyone's mind lingered a hard truth. Insurgencies do not vanish overnight. Terrorists have always adapted, always returned in different forms. For every camp destroyed, another might rise. For every ambush crushed, another could be planned. The victories of Kalari and Ilgendé were powerful, but were they permanent? This was the question whispered in homes and debated in markets. Could Traoré's vision truly hold back the tide? Or was this only a brief calm before a greater storm? The answer, no one knew. But one fact was clear. The battle for Burkina Faso was no longer just about villages and highways. It was about the future of the entire Sahel. As the echoes of gunfire faded, signs of renewal began to spread across Burkina Faso. In villages of the east, farmers returned to their fields. They tilled the soil, sowed seeds, and whispered that the next harvest would not only be food, but freedom itself. An elderly man stood at the edge of his land and said slowly, "We abandoned this field because we feared the rifles in the forest. Today, I hold my hoe with the hope that my grandchildren will eat from the soil of their ancestors." In the center-east, markets reopened. Stalls once empty now overflowed with grain, meat, and cloth. Children laughed as trucks rolled back into towns that had been starved of goods for years. People told each other, "We are reclaiming not only our land, but our lives." But the consequences of Kalari and Ilgendé were not limited to daily life. They cut deep into politics and international affairs. Inside the country, Traoré's new strategy was seen as a transformation. Instead of waiting passively, the army now struck with speed, intercepting militants in motion, denying them the chance to entrench. This change did not only bring victories, it restored faith. Citizens who once doubted the state now began to believe that their government could protect them. National television hailed Traoré as the leader who restored dignity to the nation. Yet beyond the borders, reactions were divided. In Paris, the newspaper Le Monde warned that Burkina Faso's success might create a domino effect, emboldening Mali and Niger to move further away from Western influence. Analysts feared that if Traoré's model worked, the entire Sahel could slip from France's orbit, a prospect the French state was unprepared to accept. In Washington, think tanks were split. One faction argued that Traoré could be a partner against terrorism and that the United States should cautiously engage. Another warned that he was drifting toward Moscow, especially as Burkina Faso increased its reliance on Russian drones and surveillance systems. A senior American official told CNN, "If Traoré continues to expand military cooperation with Russia, the entire security order in the Sahel could shift." and the United States will be forced to reconsider its strategy. In Moscow, support was open. Advisors, electronic warfare systems, and drone technology flowed in, signaling that Russia viewed Burkina Faso as part of its larger African strategy. Beijing also joined the game, offering surveillance equipment and infrastructure support in exchange for deeper political and economic ties. These moves showed that Kalari and Ilgendé were not only military campaigns, they were markers of a new global contest where Burkina Faso stood at the crossroads of great power rivalry. Yet one question remained: could these victories last? The history of the Sahel is filled with insurgencies that rise again from the ashes. Defeated today, they may return tomorrow with new tactics, new weapons, and support from hidden sponsors. The people of Burkina Faso celebrated, but they had not forgotten that their enemies had disappeared before, only to come back stronger. This lingering fear stayed in their hearts. In this fragile balance, another truth emerged. Military victories alone might not be enough. To secure peace, Burkina Faso would need more than weapons. It would need political unity. It would need social cohesion. It would need its young generation to believe in a future free not only from terror, but also from the cycle of poverty and instability. In Washington, the victories of Kalari and Ilgendé did not go unnoticed. Behind closed doors, policymakers debated what these operations meant for American influence in West Africa. Some saw Traoré as a potential partner in the fight against terror, a man who could stabilize a region long plagued by violence. Others saw him as a rising threat, a leader too willing to embrace Moscow's hand. In think tanks and newsrooms, the question was asked quietly but persistently: is Traoré the beginning of a new Sankara? And if so, will he meet the same fate? Across the Atlantic in Paris, the silence was uneasy. France, once the unquestioned power in the Sahel, now watched as its influence slipped further. French analysts admitted with concern that Burkina Faso's victories could inspire Mali, Niger, and Guinea to harden their stance against Paris. What was once a French stronghold was now becoming a symbol of defiance. In Moscow, however, there was no hesitation. Russian media celebrated Traoré as a young and bold leader who defied Western control. The arrival of Russian advisors and the quiet transfer of military technology underlined the Kremlin's ambitions. For Moscow, the Sahel was not only a battlefield against terrorism, but also a frontier in its struggle against Western dominance. Beijing played its role more subtly. China offered surveillance equipment and infrastructure aid, promising partnership without lectures on governance. For many in Africa, this approach was appealing. Meanwhile, in African capitals from Bamako to Conakry, leaders voiced support. They praised Burkina Faso's stand as proof that Africans could fight their own battles without foreign dictates. Regional newspapers called Traoré's victories a turning point for the Sahel. Yet in the United States, the stakes were seen through a different lens. Intelligence analysts warned that a stronger, more independent Burkina Faso could limit America's reach in counterterrorism operations. Others worried about the symbolism. If Traoré's defiance succeeded, other leaders might follow, reducing American leverage across Africa. The debate was not about one battle. It was about the future alignment of the continent. And as senators, diplomats, and generals argued, one question remained unanswered. Was this the beginning of a new partnership, or the dawn of a deeper rivalry? As the smoke cleared, one truth remained. The victories at Kalari and Ilgendé lit a spark of hope, but they also placed Burkina Faso at a dangerous crossroads. Terrorism never vanishes completely. It shifts shape, finds new allies, and returns with different strength. The history of the Sahel is filled with moments where silence on the battlefield was only a pause before an even greater storm. The roads today are open, but who can say they will not be targeted tomorrow? The villages rejoice, But can they hold their joy if militants still find ways to rearm across the borders? Traoré's strategy has revealed a new Burkina Faso, assertive, bold, and unwilling to bow. He has turned the army from a hesitant force of defense into a striking spear. Yet this boldness makes him the center of global attention. The question whispered in capitals from Paris to Washington is the same. Will Ibrahim Traoré be remembered as the savior of the Sahel, or will he meet the tragic fate of Thomas Sankara before him? The answer remains uncertain. The future of Burkina Faso, and indeed the entire Sahel, is still unwritten. What unfolds in these months and years will shape the lives of millions. And the choices of one young leader could determine whether freedom takes root or whether darkness spreads. If you believe that freedom is not a privilege but a sacred right of every people, reflect on this story. If you believe that justice and faith must rise above violence and hatred, share your voice. Burkina Faso may seem distant, but their struggle is not foreign. Their cry for safety, for the right to raise children in peace, for the chance to believe in tomorrow, is the same cry that unites us all. The victories of today are milestones, but the question remains, will they mark the beginning of lasting liberation, or only the calm before another storm?